There's a case I've talked about on this podcast before, and you may have heard of it anyway. Air Canada released a large language model chatbot that was customer facing, and a customer asked about their bereavement fare policy, and the AI hallucinated it, got it completely wrong. So when the customer went to go get reimbursed for their fare, Air Canada said, no, we're not going to do that. Why not? That's the chatbot that told you that. We didn't tell you that. The chatbot is this other entity. It's not us. We're a different thing. So blame the chatbot. Don't blame us. Now, thankfully, the judge in this case was not insane and found for the plaintiff. And so Air Canada had to pay the person what they said they would pay him or what the AI said they would pay. But this raises a larger question that's on the minds of lots of philosophers and legal scholars, which is how should we regard large language models, or how should we regard AI more generally? We could give it legal personhood. On the one hand, that sounds crazy, but on the other hand, we grant it to corporations and other non-sentient kinds of things. So perhaps AI should also be regarded as its own legal entity, as a legal person. On the other hand, you might think, that's bananas. It's a tool, it's a piece of software. So we should regard it as a thing. And there's this distinction in the law between persons and things. My guest today, David Gunkel, he's a distinguished research and teaching professor at the Department of Communications at Northern Illinois University. He's written several books on this topic. One is called Robot Rights. Another is called Person, Thing, Robot. And he explains why, among other things, we shouldn't regard AI as a thing, and we also shouldn't regard it as a person. So this is the core of our conversation. You might think that what David thinks is we should regard it as kind of part thing, part person, or maybe as a kind of proto-person, or as he says, a personhood comes along a gradient or a spectrum. And that's what I would have thought that he thinks. But actually, he thinks that this classic legal distinction, which he traces back to Roman law, between person and thing, is just fundamentally misguided. It's fundamentally broken. It's a social construct. And perhaps it was good for the times, but the times have changed, and now we need a different kind of distinction, or we need to erase that distinction in order to account for the kinds of inventions that we're creating now. So we need to blow up the whole distinction. Okay, that's what this episode is about. Please don't forget to subscribe. You can buy my book, Ethical Machines. Go to my Substack at readblackman.substack.com. And if you have any questions, comments, trenchant criticism, em@readblackman.com. That's it. Let's go talk to David. Okay, so David, you have a claim that I'm not quite sure what to do with. You think that AI is not nicely categorized as a person or a thing. I want to hear, why does the classification matter? Just in broad strokes, why might it matter? And then, I want to hear, what does it mean to say it's neither person nor thing, and what are we supposed to do? Invent the third category? What's the move here?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So we have inherited from Roman law a binary that says in both moral and legal systems, you're either a subject or an object. You're either a person or a thing. And that allows us to divide up reality in all kinds of ways to make sense of who's responsible for stuff and what's property and what's a person. And we've used this for 2,000 years and it's worked rather well. This is why, for example, corporations are considered persons, even though they are, in many people's minds, just things. It isn't because they're persons like you and I. They're not natural persons. They're legal persons. But the reason they're legal persons is because we want to be able to sue them. And you can't sue something if it's an object. It has to be a subject.
Yeah.
So these categories have been really useful for helping us just parse reality and make sense of how we understand responsibility in very complex social relationships.
Okay.
Right now we have these new devices, large language models, generative AI systems in general, that are no longer just tools or instruments of human action. It used to be that we explained our technologies to ourselves by saying they're a tool, therefore they're property, and I use this piece of property to get some job done. I'm the subject, it's the object. So we said they're just things. Yeah. Now we have technologies that are pushing against those boundaries and taking independent decisions and actions in the world that are not necessarily able to be controlled or even anticipated by human developers or users. I'll give you one really good example. When AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol at the game of Go, the journalists all said to the engineers, geez, you guys must be really smart. You built a computer that beats a world champion Go player. How did you do that? And they said, we don't know. It's an emergent behavior from its training data. And so that's a good thing. What happens when it's not a good thing? When it is, for example, a self-driving vehicle that takes out a pedestrian. And we say, I don't know who's accountable for this. I don't know who's responsible for this. So these legal categories that are very useful for us are getting in the way of us making sense of what AI is in our current social reality and scaling to the opportunities and challenges of the 21st century.
Okay, so one question is, and these are all clarificatory questions. So is the idea that, okay, it's neither natural person nor a thing, but we ought to regard AI, or at least AI that can take action, as a legal person in the way that we regard corporations as legal persons? Or do you think that there's, I feel like, a moral sense of personhood that you think they also are creeping up to or something like that?
Again, good question. So there are people who are arguing both these things. I am neither of those people, but let me explain who these people are.
Yeah.
So right now you have a movement called the AI welfare movement being led by Jeff Sebo and Long and a few others. And they're making the argument that they could be natural persons.
Okay, that's bananas, but okay.
That there's something that they have interests in, and therefore we have a responsibility to treat them in ways that we would treat maybe each other or animals, and that's a natural person argument.
Okay.
There are others who are doing more on the legal side, saying, okay, no, they're not going to be natural persons. They're not like you and I. They're not even like animals. But they are important, influential social actors. And like corporations, we need to figure out how to fit them into our legal system. And therefore, legal personhood may be one way to do this because it worked with other artifacts. Corporations, organizations, actually ships are considered legal persons in maritime law. So we've done this before. And so many lawyers are saying it's an easy fix. All we got to do is take existing corporate law and apply it to ChatGPT or DeepSeek or any of these other things. My argument is both of these are extremely fraught in various ways.
Okay.
And that maybe the problem isn't fitting the AI into one box or the other box. Maybe the problem are the boxes that we inherited from the ancient Romans. Maybe the Romans weren't just quite up to speed in what's happening in the 21st century just yet. And that operating in this structure is limiting us in responding to the challenges that we face right now.
Okay, so let's talk for a second about why not just put them in the tool category?
Yeah,
I guess that's the whole question. Yeah, sure. The data scientists at DeepMind who made AlphaGo, they were being a bit modest, right? They don't know how it came up with, what is it, Move 37? They don't know exactly how it did that, but...
In game 2.
Right, but they know all the data that they gave it. They know how AlphaGo played, I don't know, tens of thousands, millions, billions, I don't know how many games of Go because it was engaged in unsupervised learning. It feels to me like they're being a bit modest. So they don't know how it came up with Move 37, but they know how it became the kind of thing that could come up with Move 37. And I'd say the same thing about that now. Claude, ChatGPT does absolutely amazing things. Do we have explainability? Do we know why it came up with this particular output? No. Do we really understand everything about how in general it comes up with its outputs? No. Do we know how he built the thing and how it became to have these kinds of capacities that we weren't predicting? Yeah, we did this, that, and the other thing. Transformers, blah, blah, data, blah, blah, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. It feels a bit too robust for them to say, oh, we don't know how he did it. Yeah, you do.
So I don't want to get into the weeds on the AlphaGo thing because it's
of course. Just as an example. ChatGPT, whatever, doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think there's a difference between explainability and accountability.
Yeah, sure.
And if these were just things, then the line of accountability would go back to some human who is a natural person who we would say is responsible for what the algorithm did or didn't do. And that has worked with things like chainsaws and things like automobiles. Software. Even software.
Regular software, non-AI software.
But once you start bringing into the mix connectionism, deep learning, training on massive amounts of data that no human being can actually wrap their head around, and the algorithm starts making decisions, there is less ability to trace back through all that and say, that's the guy that's responsible for this. He is the one who made the mistake, or she's the one who made the mistake. Because if the error, think about bias in large language models. The bias is in the data. So when the algorithm spits out something racist or sexist, who is accountable for that? All of us? Here's the problem. You get these responsibility gaps. So you have problems like you had with the 2008 financial crisis, where the bundling of mortgage-backed securities was so complex, and we were able to pass around the responsibility and accountability in a way that in the final analysis, nobody was responsible for all the money that was lost in the market.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about justice, nobody being responsible is really unsatisfying.
Okay, so here's maybe a potential counterexample. You can tell me how good of a counterexample it is or why it's no good. Suppose I'm on top of a mountain. There's a big boulder up there. And there's some hikers down below, but they're pretty far off to the left, far off to the right. They're not down the center where I am. And I'm like, oh, it'd be cool to see this boulder roll down this mountain. That's just cool looking. So I push the boulder, and unbeknownst to me, it was like a game. Remember that game? Was it Plinko from Price is Right? I'm really dating myself here.
Oh, I don't remember.
You drop the disc on the top, and there's sort of these pegs, and it like falls into a slot. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, for people of a certain age who might remember Plinko, they'll get that reference. But if not, forget it. There's thousands, tens of thousands of dirt heaps, pebbles, larger rocks, this, that, and the patches of grass, blah, 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 that are going to affect the trajectory of that boulder as it rolls down the mountain. I don't know what all those things are. Like, no one could possibly know. So it hits divot number 1, it hits pebble number 17, it blah, blah, blah. And lo and behold, eventually it makes its way down and it plows through some hikers. We don't have any difficulty in assigning responsibility in that case. I wasn't responsible for divot 17 being there or whatever it is.
Nope.
But it was my responsibility. I'm accountable for making sure that I'm pushing it under sufficiently safe conditions. I didn't do my due diligence, so I'm responsible for that outcome. I'm accountable for it. Why not regard something like bias that same way? Yeah, look, you didn't create the bias. You're not responsible for data points, whatever, X through N17, whatever, it doesn't matter. Just like you're not responsible for the divots and the grass heaps and the dirt holes and blah, blah, blah. You gave it the green light. You deployed it.
Right.
And you didn't sufficiently test it. So you're accountable.
So let me answer this in 2 ways. One is, the example you just gave is usually explained away as an act of God. And I don't know that we want to say that
Really?
AI is an act of God.
Wait, I would legally an act of God, presumably, but is that true? If I push a boulder down a mountain and I crush someone, I'm not legally accountable. Certainly, I'm morally accountable.
So one, the questions in that trial, should it ever go to trial, would be, did you intend to push the boulder to hit people?
Sure.
Did you accidentally lean against it and therefore it broke away from the rock face?
Sure, that's a different,
and tumbled down?
Sure.
So in a lot of cases, this is a matter of what in law is called an act of God.
Okay.
So I'll give you another sort of comparison here. If a hurricane blows in off the Gulf of Mexico, and I will call it the Gulf of Mexico, and it devastates a town in Alabama, there's no one who's responsible for that. Even if climate change and human impact on climate change made that happen, it's an act of God.
Sure.
If BP's deep Horizon well spills oil into the Gulf of Mexico, then we say, no, it's not an act of God. It's an act of somebody, but it's not a somebody. It is the legal person that is BP, and we hold them accountable for it. Now, why didn't we solve the corporate law problem back in the 19th century by saying it's always the CEO who's accountable for bad results in the corporation?
Yeah.
If we did that, it would be very difficult for people to justify, one, becoming a CEO to begin with, but two, investing in the corporation because they would be liable. All investors would be owners and therefore be liable for what the corporation did. So we separated these things out so that we have one legal person, the corporation, who can do nefarious things and be held accountable and insulate shareholders and CEOs from direct culpability.
Okay, so let's get back to the core view, because maybe I don't have it in sight yet. So we don't want to regard it as a legal person. Is that right? We don't want to regard
I think,
on your view?
So in my view, if you look at the history of legal personhood for corporations, it has solved a bunch of problems, but it has created a whole host of other problems. And therefore, I think there are reasons to be hesitant to extending legal personhood to AI in the same way.
Okay, but we also don't want to regard it as a thing. So I know we have this new category that you want it to occupy, a third box. Can you say more about what that third box looks like?
So third boxes are difficult even more in this scenario because between person and thing, we had said there's really no third category. But that's wrong. The Romans had a third category. They had things that at various times could behave as persons. And guess what those things are called?
You got me.
Slaves.
Okay.
So Roman slave law categorized slaves as property, but they could conduct business transactions on behalf of their master, and in the process of conducting business transactions, needed to be a person because they can't execute a contract as a piece of property.
Sure.
American slave law from the Confederacy pretty much followed this template, and we see it legally laid out in a way that's very similar to what the Romans did. There are some legal scholars who've said, okay, Gunkel, not a big deal. You don't want it to be a thing, you don't want it to be a person. Robots, AI should be slaves. And they've said that this is, they've actually said, all we need to do is take Roman slave law and update it for the 21st century, problem solved.
That was unexpected. Okay, I don't even know where to begin. Okay, why? What? I guess the question, there's lots of questions, but one question is, it feels like you're just going to push the questions to a different point, which is something like, in this particular case, should we regard it as a thing or a person? So when the slave signed the document on behalf of their owner, were they acting in their capacity as a thing or in their capacity as a person? Answer, person. Why? Blah, 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 whatever the rationale is. They're not a combo. It's not even a third box. It's really a thing that bounces back from one box to the next, which is weird, but it's not a new box in a way. And so with the AI, the question would become, in this instance, when it, performed transaction X or whatever action it performed, it engaged in action Y, was it acting in its capacity? Was it behaving in its capacity as a thing or as a person? And then we're going to have some rationale for why we should consider it a thing in some instances and a person in another.
And that's pretty much how the Romans approached it in their slave laws. And I will say, with this notion of slavery, I'm not really worried about what the AI is going to feel because it's enslaved. Yeah. That's not my issue. My issue is, what does it say about us that we're allowing ourselves to become masters again, that we're allowing ourselves to re-actualize Roman slave law as a solution to this problem? No, it's actually not mine. It's Ugo Pagallo's and a few other people's solution. Yeah. I actually think we need a little more fine-grained range of moral and legal categories that we can utilize to make sense of novel entities that don't fit these categories. And it's not just AI and robots. Animals are another good example. The way that we've tried to solve the animal problem is we said, okay, some animals are things and other animals are more like persons. But where do we draw that line? How do we sort that out? And you can see already now the way in which environmentalist groups and animal rights advocates are advocating on behalf of animals and the environment is they're getting them declared persons in courts of law.
Legal persons.
Legal persons. So in India, dolphins are persons. And
what are?
Dolphins.
Oh, dolphins. Got it. Yeah, okay. And
the Indian court has declared them persons because they want to protect them from exploitation in dolphin shows that were engaging in abuse. Okay. In New Zealand, a river and the ecosystem surrounding the river is a legal person. Okay. And they've done this on the behest of the indigenous tribes that have lived in the area who are hoping to protect their ecosystem from pollution and exploitation. Okay. And so we're getting this explosion right now in legal persons. All kinds of things are legal persons. And that seems like a nice solution because it gets them out of the thing category. But again, the same with the AI and the robots, we might do better if we started to think about other range of categories by which to classify these things in our legal systems. Yeah. So that we're not limited to this Roman schematic.
Okay, so I have two questions. Still just want the picture fully painted. One is, could you say a little bit about moral worth and legal personhood? I would think that a natural way of thinking about what kinds of things ought to have legal personhood are those kinds of things that are persons in the sense that they've got moral worth or something along those lines. Well, so why should dolphins be regarded as legal persons and not things? Well, because they're sufficiently intelligent, they have feelings, blah, 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 so they have some kind of moral worth. Maybe it's not as much moral worth as a human being, but it's enough such that they should get legal protections and be regarded as a legal person. I'm not saying that's the argument, I don't know, but I just want more detail to the connection between moral worth and legal personhood. The corporation thing, I see that maybe you think that corporations have moral worth if you're like Hegel or something. So that's one question. And then the other question is, why not just go full in on, okay, fine, legal personhood, just give AI legal personhood like a corporation. I know that you got a story about, or reasons for thinking that, no, that's not the right move either, but I don't fully understand that yet.
So let's talk about the moral. So we often think that legal status derives from moral status, that something has moral worth before it has legal worth.
Yep.
And I think the experience of corporate personhood is actually the inverse. We gave it legal personhood before any consideration of moral worth, right?
Yeah.
And that was to solve a social problem, to solve the integration of these novel entities into our social reality in a way that made sense for us. We're not worried about the feelings of the corporation. We're not worried about their dignity or about their interests. We're worried about how things function socially in our world, where we have entities that operate in ways that need them to be legal subjects as opposed to objects. Now, with regards to dolphins, it seems pretty simple, right? They're living things and they have interests, and okay, so give them legal personhood.
Yeah.
Harder to make that argument for, I don't know, a mountain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where the legal thing seems to be coming first, that we're trying to retrofit moral status through the legal apparatus of legal personhood.
Yeah. So maybe I want to put it this way then. Tell me if this is an okay way to put it or if I'm missing something. There's all sorts of reasons why you might give something legal personhood. There could be moral reasons, like in the case of dolphins, perhaps. There could be something like economic reasons in the case of a corporation, right? So in order for our economy to work sufficiently well, we need these things to have a certain set of rights that we associate with legal personhood. So just give the corporations legal personhood. It could be something like aesthetic value in the case of the mountain or something along those lines. I'm not saying that's a great argument, but the bottom line is, there's moral worth and there's legal personhood. And while moral worth might sometimes be a reason for granting a thing legal personhood, there's all sorts of reasons one might articulate or offer for giving legal personhood.
And I think part of the problem with legal personhood is that the criteria for granting legal personhood is so incredibly broad right now that it is not something that is rigorously defined in a way that we can say we have one set of criteria utilized in every single place in every single way. And to make it even worse, this is always based on jurisdiction. So there's a lake between the US and Canada. On the US side, it's a person. On the Canadian side, it's not. Same.
Those condescending Canadians. So I get that. I presumably lots going to depend upon something like case law. And this thing that has not yet been granted legal personhood is sufficiently similar to this thing which we have previously granted legal personhood. And so we ought to give it to this new thing as well for the same reasons that we gave it to the other thing. And that's why we don't have the clear criteria, because it's more like reasoning by analogy than it is something like necessary and sufficient conditions for being a legal person.
Yeah, I'll point out that our word person actually has an interesting etymology. It comes from the Latin word persona. And persona doesn't mean a human person like you and I. Persona was the mask that was worn by actors in a stage play. So person is a role, and a role is something that is operationalized in social reality. So the question by making persons isn't who they are, but what role we want them to play.
Sorry, could you say that again? Not the whole thing, but what do you mean when you say person is a role that's operationalized? What does that mean?
So we say, for example, we want the corporation to play a particular role in our social world. So we give it personhood. We give it a role of a legal subject. And so if we think of person not as some ontological category that is given by God, but as a socially constructed or construed role or position in social reality that we decide, then I think we get a better handle on how personhood actually functions.
Yeah, that's helpful. Okay, good. That's helpful. Okay, so now let's go back to the problems with granting AI the kind of personhood that we would attribute to a corporation.
Yeah. So I think right now you can already see how this is going to go if you look at what has happened in efforts to try to make legal frameworks for AI in the United States. Who has the ear of the lawmakers and the folks in Congress with regards to making these new laws?
Silicon Valley.
It's the Silicon Valley tech giants.
Yep.
And that's because they are able to lobby Congress directly as legal persons. And the worry becomes, if AI is a legal person, we will have a version of that amped up to 11 or some other capacity. And so the main reason for being skeptical about simply applying the personhood category to AI is when we look at what has happened with legal personhood for other kinds of artifacts prior to AI, the corporation, the organization, ships, you name it, there is a lot of abuse. And if we're very skeptical about AI hype and AI abuse right now, maybe personhood is just more cover for persisting on that track.
So what kinds of abuses are you talking about, and how would those kinds of abuses be manifested if we were to give AI legal personhood?
Again, right now it's all speculative based on analogy, right? Based on analogy to corporations. But I think the same way in which corporations are able to exercise power that is greater than what you and I as individual citizens have, what if an AI had the ability to call up its congressperson and over the phone or in person, try to lobby for its interests or what it's told its interests are, right?
Yeah, sure.
That's one worry. Another worry is if indeed the AI is a legal person, then if something does go wrong, and think of small things like a accident with a self-driving vehicle or big things, taking down power grids or other kinds of nefarious activity like this.
Sure.
It's conceivable that the AI would be legally responsible for the outcome and the corporation that owns the AI walks away scot-free.
We don't want that. Yeah.
And we don't want that.
That was the case of didn't turn out to be the case, but with the Canada Air stuff, the Canada Air case.
Yeah. Oh,
right.
yeah.
So
yeah.
So just for the audience, then someone writes into the Canada Air chatbot, which I think was an LLM. They say, "What's your bereavement fare policy?" It says, "Oh, our bereavement fare policy is blah blah blah." Guy says, "Okay, great. I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna get the ticket and I'll get reimbursed." He goes back. Fast forward, tries to get his reimbursement for the bereavement fare. They said, that's not our policy. And then he said, that's what your chatbot said. And they said, oh, that's our chatbot. That's its responsibility. That's not us. We're Canada Air. That's an LLM. So that was their attempt to say, no, that's a different legal person than us, right? So it's the chatbot that's responsible. The courts were having nothing with it. And they threw that out, or they didn't throw it out. They found in favor of the plaintiff, of the person who sued, and against Canada Air. So that's the kind of case where, they're trying to push. Okay. So now we come to, all right, look, we don't want to regard it in the way that we would regard a corporation as being a sort of full-time legal person, because it would, and the primary reason, or at least a strong reason, is it would make it the case that corporations that are actually accountable for the failures, for the misbehaving of an AI, would escape accountability when they actually are accountable. So we don't want that. We also don't want to regard it as a tool, so you say, because we make these things that are essentially indeterministic, that we can't fully predict how they're going to operate out in the wild. And so just like with the boulder coming down the mountainside, we shouldn't hold me responsible if I was the one who pushed the rock. We're not going to hold the AI responsible. Sorry, we're not going to hold me responsible, even if I work for a corporation, if the AI discriminates, because let's say we did our due diligence, we tried to do the thing, we looked for it, it turned out to be discriminatory anyway for unforeseen circumstances. So we don't want to just regard it as a tool, because then there'd be no responsibility. And so we need it to bounce back and forth between being the kind of thing for which a corporation is accountable who releases it, and the AI being accountable?
There are a number of proposals that are floating around that both moral philosophers and legal scholars are debating currently. One is called gradient personhood, which is to recognize that person is not one kind of thing, but it has matters of degree. So instead of bouncing around back and forth, we would have a range of persons with human persons on one end of the spectrum and maybe AI on the other end, and animals on the other end of the spectrum, or something like that.
Sure,
and the idea is to open up the category in a way that is recognizing that this is not a binary item, that this is a thing where there's matters of degree, and trying to come up with what this would look like.
So I get at least at the conceptual level, I understand. What problem does that solve, though? How is that supposed to help us? I want to hear other proposals as well, but I'm trying to figure out what problem are we trying to solve here?
We're trying to find a problem. The problem we're trying to resolve is, do we only have two kinds of legal entities, or should we have more? And so it's possible to create other legal entities that are neither persons nor things, but are hybrids of one form or the other. Maybe some more thing-like, but with some capacities of persons. Maybe some more person-like, but with some capacities of things, and therefore create kind of a spectrum that is a little easier to manage in the face of these new challenges.
Okay, let me put it slightly differently when I say what problem are we trying to solve. What are the kinds of legal situations we might find ourselves in with AI such that thinking of personhood as a spectrum?
Yes, let's just take a really simple one, because thinking about the complex stuff is too big. So let's take a self-driving vehicle manufactured by, let's say, Google. No, let's say Ford. Let's go with Ford.
Sure.
Using a Google AI system as its brains, operating on the streets of Chicago, and it is occupied by some family that's going to a party.
Okay.
And in the course of going to the party, this automobile accidentally strikes and kills a pedestrian.
Sure.
Now the question is, who's responsible for the accident?
Legally responsible.
Legally responsible. Who's accountable for paying for what happened in this case?
Yeah.
Obviously, the family in the vehicle who's exercising no control over it is probably not a good place to lay the blame, because they're just passengers.
Yep.
Then you say, okay, so maybe it's Ford, because they built this, they manufactured it, and they put it on the market, and as a result, product liability law, they are liable for what happened. But the Ford company is going to want to say, we're not going to be making these things if every time there's a small accident, we, for having made it, are responsible for the bad outcome.
Yeah.
So then you say, okay, let's make Google, who built the brains inside the car, responsible for it. Mm-hmm. And the Google Corporation is going to take a very similar line that the Ford Corporation has taken. We just built the software and put it inside this device. We don't control it once it is out in the wild. Mm-hmm. And so you have this situation where you're trying to figure out where the responsibility, where the liability is to be assigned. Mm-hmm. And if that is going to be in any way predictable and rigorous, we have to have a way of resolving this question.
Okay.
And that means maybe we would be able to get some traction on this if we had ways of recognizing that the car itself is somewhat accountable for what happens there, and therefore can be held liable in some sort of way. To go back to your Air Canada instance, that's not the first or last time someone's going to try this. We're going to try this again and again. And if all we have are persons and things, we don't have, at least in our legal toolbox, ways of maybe parsing this in a way that helps us respond to some of these more complex scenarios.
Okay, so here's a concern. So let's grant all of that. I'll grant you, for the sake of argument, that in that particular case, we ought to regard the car as a legal person, and so it's somehow legally responsible. I guess so. I guess that sort of helps to solve a conceptual problem or a metaphysical problem or something along those lines. I'm not sure it solves the problem of accountability more broadly, though, which is to say, someone's got to literally and figuratively pay for this. So, you know, does the car have any money? No? Okay, shit. Okay, so it's legally accountable, it can't pay us. Can we put it in prison and say you can't drive it anymore? Sure, although it's not really going to care. It's not really a punishment. It's hard to punish a self-driving car. So in some sense, yeah, fine. I'll grant it legal personhood. I'll grant you all that. I'll grant you that it's to some degree accountable for the death of the pedestrian, but that doesn't seem to help.
No, and that's because we've granted it legal personhood. If we grant it something less than legal personhood, then we are able to create schemes for no-fault liability, where the car is the agent of the action, but is not morally accountable for it, like a person would be, or legally accountable for it, like a person would be. And because no fault liability has like an insurance scheme attached to it, the damages are paid out of this sort of no fault liability insurance structure that is put in place. In other words, it gives us some more legal tools to have responses to some of these challenges that we're going to face as we integrate these more autonomous technologies into our world.
Maybe this. Okay, so one question is, who holds the insurance policy and whose insurance does it count against?
So any insurance company.
Is it going to be Google or Ford in this world?
Or it could be, to go back to a thing from our childhood, Mutual of Omaha. or State Farm or Allstate. It could be any of the large insurers.
Right. No, I get that. But who's going? But that policy is owned by someone, right?
Correct.
And so Google says,
so we
take Ford. Go talk to Ford's insurance company, not ours. We're Google.
Right.
We just built the brains. We
would have to figure out what that would look like. We don't know because all we're working with right now is thing in person.
But why does that help? Because the point, for some reason, I don't fully understand it, but giving it, let's call it quasi-personhood or proto-personhood or something along those lines, is supposed to help us solve a kind of legal problem, right? Someone has to be held legally accountable, or some set of entities needs to be held legally accountable. And let's give some of it anyway to the AI, that's the self-driving car. Okay. How does that help us get out of this legal morass of, no, it's not my fault, it's your fault. No, it's not my fault, it's your fault. And the answer was, if we can assign accountability or legal personhood or proto-personhood to the car, then we can enact the sort of no fault thing, the no fault insurance thing. And then it's the insurance problem. And then I say, okay, number one, why do we have to give AI quasi-personhood in order for us to get at the no fault insurance thing? I'm not sure I see that connection yet. And even if that's settled, and you're absolutely right that we need quasi-proto-personhood for cars in order to enact the no-fault insurance policy thing, there's still going to be a question about whether it's Google's insurance or Ford's insurance or the people who are in the car's insurance.
Right.
And so the car having proto-personhood doesn't solve that problem. Should we go to Google's insurance company or should we go to Ford's insurance company?
So it's not whose insurance company, it's who's paying the premiums on the insurance.
Sure. Okay.
And I think that is something that has yet to be resolved.
Okay.
Is this part of the cost of owning a self-driving vehicle?
Okay.
Is this part of the cost of manufacturing a self-driving vehicle? This would need some legal structure in order for it to be operationalized, which is why I'm saying, if we're working only with these very limited categories, it's harder for us to address those questions and resolve them.
Do I need to answer that big question about how should we regard the personhood of this entity in order to say, look, this car is going to have AI, it's going to be self-driving, blah, 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 blah. If it screws up in ways that were not reasonably foreseeable or something like that by the corporation that released it, then it's a no-fault claim. Can't I just say that? Why do I have to wheel in the sort of big distinction between personhood and thinghood?
Yeah, I don't think we need to. I actually think those categories are the problem. The AI is not the problem.
But you want it to have quasi-personhood or something like that.
No, I don't.
Oh, you don't? Sorry.
No.
You want a third thing.
I don't even want a third thing. I think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think these categories are fucked.
Ah, okay. That's the headline. I thought the headline was, there's persons and there's things, and AI is neither person or thing, so we need a third box. But your point is, no, it's all fucked. Just get rid of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't even know. Okay. So we get rid of personhood and thinghood, and I take it that those distinctions were meant to do something for us.
Yeah, no. So
functionally,
we're still going to have person and thing categories, right? You're still going to be a natural born human person. Legally, you're going to be with a set of rights and responsibilities. Yeah. You're going to be able to own property like this thing, and as a piece of property, it's a thing in your possession. Okay. But trying to fit AI into those boxes and robots into those boxes and animals into those boxes and the environment into those boxes is really turning out to be a fool's errand as we struggle against these boundaries. And therefore, I think coming up with a better way of addressing these questions and coming up with a solution that doesn't require us to think in this either or scenario is what I find to be the real challenge here.
Oh, that's helpful, because I take it, one thing that you might be saying is something like, the legal system has tied itself up in knots in such a way that it's going to make it very hard for, say, juries and judges to make a decision about who's accountable in these AI cases.
Yeah, and not just our legal system, our moral systems too. And I'll point out that this tying ourselves in knots is really a legacy of sort of the Western tradition, because other traditions don't have this problem. You think of indigenous traditions where they have this notion of kinship that is shared among living and non-living things. They don't go through life parsing reality in one of two little boxes. They have a much more robust way of organizing their world. Now, does that mean they're right in their organization? No, it just means it's a different way of doing things. That our way of doing things has led us to tying ourselves into knots. So if we're going to untie that knot, perhaps it is time to think about where that originates and why we got ourselves here to begin with.
I guess I could see a similar, maybe this is too off topic, but I'll raise it anyway. When we're engaged in moral deliberation about the moral worth of animals, we often get really tied up in knots. Is it a rational agent, or is it just about sentience? Is it like, and then what's his name? Jeffrey, I think is that Rutgers animal rights guy?
Sibo.
Sibo?
Is it Sibo? Yeah, I think it's Sibo. He's at NYU.
No, Mick something or other.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, whatever. You get these edge cases where it's a human being who has intellectual or general capacities that are less than, say, a dolphin or something along those lines. And it's, are you saying that the human being is a person, has personhood and worth, but the animal who has greater capacities, intellectual capacities, greater capacities for empathy, blah, 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 doesn't it? What? That seems crazy.
Yep.
And then you get tied up in us. Like, yeah, that's true, but I also have this intuition that the human being still has worth, blah, blah, blah. I'd rather kill the dolphin. I don't know. I mean, some people do. And it doesn't matter. And my point is, I don't know how I landed on this topic. My point is, though, that you might think maybe that whole conversation about what has moral worth got poisoned by thinking about either you're a thing or you're a person. And that's why we have so much trouble at these sort of edge cases.
Yeah, I would say so. And I'd say if you're looking for an edge case, there's no better edge case than the fetus. The entire abortion debate is precisely about when does that thing in the womb become a person.
Yeah. Right. And so if you say, look, those categories aren't useful. Thinghood and personhood are not always useful. Or we're not glomming on to natural kinds or like reality where it's a sort of, would you go this far? We've socially constructed, these are social construct categories or something like that, thing and personhood, and that those concepts are beginning to break down or something along those lines?
Yeah, in fact, that's what I was getting at with this idea that persona is a socially constructed role. And its opposite thing is also a socially constructed role that we have imposed on reality, and therefore it's not a natural kind. It has a history, it has a place it came from, it has ties to certain cultures, certain places. Yeah.
Okay, so really we could keep talking about this forever, I think. But one last question, where do you want to see things go? So what would you like to see in, I don't know, the community of moral philosophers? Where would you like things to go in the sort of legal realm as it comes to AI? How would things develop fruitfully if they were to develop fruitfully, what would that look like to you?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. Let's start with the legal side.
Yeah.
Law advances much slower than technology does. I have a lawyer friend who says that technology advances at light speed, law at pen and paper speed. And it's pretty true. Yep. So we are going to be, pragmatically speaking, trying to use all these old laws to fit these novel entities, and we're going to be struggling here for a while. I think what I would like to see on the legal side is a little more recognition that it's time for us to solve problems in the short term, but begin thinking long term about how to revise a lot of these inherited concepts that have been there only because we've accepted them and they become traditional. On the moral philosophy side, I think instead of trying to resolve the question of AI and robots by using already accepted moral categories, again, I think we should look at this as an opportunity to do some self-reflection and say, where do those moral categories come from? Who tells us that these are the right ones and these are the only ones? And begin to do some really good theoretical, philosophical reflection on what other possibilities are there. What new words are there? What new categories are there? What new schemes for arranging this stuff is possible? I think oftentimes we look at philosophy as being, at least in the area of AI, this kind of applied thing. We go to the philosophers when we want some sort of applied ethics to plug into these problems with AI. I think we should be more adventurous. I think we should really start to examine what the limitations of the existing ways of thinking are and allow ourselves to imaginatively look at what is possible and think about what that might make available to us beyond the usual ways of following standard operating procedure.
All right, that's a great place to end it. A call to arms. Or conceptual arms, anyway.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Thanks, David. This was great. Thanks so much for doing this.
Sure, thanks. It was great being here.
Thanks so much, everyone, for listening. And now let me thank the people who have made this podcast possible. So, first of all, we have Delano Alexander. He's been with me since day one. He showed me even how to start recording a podcast in the first place. He does editing stuff. He's been fantastic, and he does really everything I ask him to and more. I've never met anyone else who just says so much. Yeah, I don't know how to do that, but I'll figure it out. What more could you ask for in a producer? Next up, Jennifer Strong, my podcast guru. I don't know what else to call her. She just has advised me on how to design a podcast, how to grow it, and she's responsible for, if you like, this kind of season 2 relaunch and everything around it. So thank you to you, Jennifer. Next up, Meg Marco, responsible for all the excellent artwork. Before I did the artwork, I didn't really know what I was doing. We put it together. It worked well enough, but I think Meg really did a phenomenal job bringing everything together. Garrett Lang, sound engineer that I frankly don't deserve. He's just too good for this podcast. Don't tell him I said that, though. Next up, Benjamin Kultgen. He is a professor of philosophy who has helped me source guests, identify who's interesting, who has things to say, etc., etc. So without him, I wouldn't have anyone to talk to. And then finally, Ashley Wasylenko, who helps with all manner of administrative things, making sure that the podcast guests find their way to the podcast, can schedule the recording, get their bios and headshots, and really just keeping the show on the rails and me organized. Thanks to all of you. Really appreciate all your hard work.